there was a fact crisis that turned into a trust crisis. And now I would definitely say it's an epistemological crisis where we've sort of lost any sort of reference point to what the facts even could be.
Hi, welcome to Founder Real Talk. I'm your host, Josh Broward, CEO of Wisdom Partners. And in case you're joining us for the first time, let me just tell you about what we're doing here. The whole point of Founder Real Talk is to help founders understand the journey of other founders. Sometimes I say being a founder is the loneliest job in the world. It's like being on a rowboat in the middle of an ocean during a hurricane. And sometimes it's helpful just to know there's other crazy people in rowboats not far away, and their experience is pretty similar to yours. So today we have an experienced rower, four-time founder, Kira Shishkin. His most recent company is Informed, which is trying to deal with the news and information crisis in the world today. It's the #1 news by text app in America, and he's won a host of awards, has education from top-tier schools, but helping us get our news is where he's spending most of his time now. So without further ado, Kira, great to have you here.
Josh, thank you so much for having me. It's a very generous introduction, and I'm delighted to join you.
Thanks. Kira, can you tell us about Informed and what got you into this?
Absolutely. I feel like with this venture, especially even more than the previous, there's a real alignment of purpose to skill set to just the timing that we're living through. Informed.now is a news concierge, a first of a kind news concierge service for the everyday American. We also service Canada, so for the everyday North American, so to speak. But our mission is really to take the clickbait, the bias, the solicitation, all the advertisement, the sensationalism out of the news and make news readable again for the everyday person who doesn't have a lot of time and can't afford to spend hours a day researching and trying to cross-check, figure out what the truth is in the news media. And so we make that process easy. And we like to describe our mission as we're on a mission to put the power of facts back in the palm of the everyday American.
That's great. You know, I was thinking, I won't name any names because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but some people close to me, I was talking with them this last week and I said, you heard about Venezuela, right? And they hadn't. And this was, 2, 3, 4, 5 days after. And I think they're so frustrated with normal news outlets that they just don't have a news intake that they are willing to engage.
Absolutely. And you can't blame them because the systems that are, don't make it attractive and they don't make it worthwhile to stay informed. Because you're bombarded with information. As you're trying to read, you're also being solicited aggressively every step of the way. And you have to do so much additional cognitive kind of work to figure things out, to actually get informed, that a lot of people naturally say like, oh, I don't have time to do this. And you can't blame them because I don't think it's a personal fault, disengagement. I think it's the fault of the systems that we inherited and that we are sort of stuck with. But part of the spirit of our mission is we know that we can rebuild information integrity and rebuild information infrastructure so that the systems are more user-friendly and more reader-friendly in the future.
So I imagine most people listening have probably never heard of news by text. So saying we're the biggest news by text service in America, they're like, how many are there? 3? Like, I don't know. And what does that mean? So if someone were to become a customer of Informed, what would they get? What does that even mean for them?
Totally. Simply put, news by text service is really, in our case, a news by SMS service where we send SMS to our readers every morning of every weekday. And we chose that channel for its minimalism, for its immediacy, and for its sort of like, it cuts through all the noise. There's no accounts, no account management. There's no passwords. There's no, privacy violating products. There is no platform. There is no app store. It's just the most direct sort of channel from our mind into yours. And the minimalism of the platform also, it doesn't allow for the format doesn't allow for rich media. No videos, no fancy images, no tons of links, none of that sort of stuff jumping out at you from your screen. And so we picked this format again, for the urgency, the immediacy of it, but also for the inevitable, unavoidable minimalism that we stand for and that we thought SMS would be the perfect channel for.
So basically, you get a text message every morning with 4, 5, 10 short news summaries. Very short.
Essentially. The news summarization is nothing new, of course, right? The news digest space has been around for I think as long as news has been around, so forever. But we do summarize a little bit differently, and I think the way we summarize is rather unprecedented. So we're not trying to. Well, first of all, I would mention this is the primary focus. We're sort of the opposite of clickbait. We're trying to give you the length of a headline, so a very, very brief summary of the story or the development that's going on. But we are looking to pack as much insight as possible in the least amount of words and even characters. It's even down to characters, so that you get the meat, the juice, the point of what is being talked about without suggesting a perspective or suggesting how you should feel about this or that. And so in our daily SMS, you get, I would say, from 5 to 7, usually, bullet points that are chosen for their significance on how much have they changed the world in the last 24 hours. These summaries are extremely laconic, they're extremely concise, and they do so both to avoid bias, because at some point, if you get too long, you're going to have to kind of introduce perspectivism into it. So part of it is to reduce any sort of suggestion of a perspective. And part of it is we really sort of practice the art of, can we get to the point without telling you a whole essay?
All right. Let me offer a potential philosophical pushback. There is a French philosopher, mostly in the second half of the 20th century, Paul Ricoeur, and he said, no one has a perspective from nowhere. It's kind of a double negative, but the point is everybody has a perspective. There is no position from which you can be unbiased. Now, he's from a philosophical perspective, so he might not be using bias in the same way that you are. But how do you reflect on that?
Totally. I think it's a really valuable point to bring up, right? It's the most common criticism, I would say, we hear from non-users. And it's one of the most common delights that we hear from users when, like, oh, wow, it is possible. It is possible to do this, right? And I would say maybe 3 things. One is stripping content and writing of bias is not impossible. It's just not been done before. Because when you look across the media landscape, no one's attempting to provide neutral or objective news. There's always some sort of a spin that is guided either by advertiser incentives or by sponsor incentives or by investor incentives or by the editorial pen of the publication. There haven't really been any credible large-scale attempts in the news media of folks actually trying to be objective and meaning it too, right? Meaning it, I think, is the more important part, because everyone says that. So I think with the intention, you are able to certainly get a lot further than if you're someone who is Fox News type of publication or a CNN publication where they have a perspective and they're calling to their tribe from the vantage point of their perspective. And so I think one is the intention. The second piece, I think, is the concision, the brevity that I spoke of earlier. I think the only way I would correct the philosopher's point is there's a certain threshold of writing or speaking at which point, like, you have to have perspective because you run out of the essential things to say. We intentionally limit ourselves to just the essential facts, basically bullet points, where we are able to strip away, where we stop short of saying any more that would lead us to providing a perspective or an opinion. So there's also the concision piece. Well, those are the two main points. Maybe there was only two. Maybe there was no three.
They were good enough. Who needs a third one? So I'll have one more philosophical take, and then we can jump into business stuff. Even though, I mean, in some ways, your business, it has philosophical underpinnings. So I'll tell you, I'll start with a story. When I'm driving, especially on road trips, I go kind of old school. I don't use a playlist or Spotify or anything. I just flip through the radio, like way old school, right? And sometimes I'll even do AM radio just for kicks because I'm curious. And I remember I was driving through a southern US state during COVID, and it was not long after President Trump had recovered from COVID. And so I'm flipping through these different channels, and I would go from like a conservative Fox-oriented talk show to an NPR, more liberal-oriented talk show, and they're describing when Trump got off of the helicopter and returned to the White House after leaving the hospital. And I just realized it's as if these people are living in different worlds. That the same basic facts happened, but the way that they interpret them, they don't even sound like the same facts anymore. And I realized, oh, America has an epistemology crisis. Epistemology being the study of knowledge. So how do we know what we know? And the truth is, we don't know, and now it's even like worse with AI and all that kind of stuff. Like, we don't know how to trust information anymore. We don't know if we can really be sure of what we see or think we see or hear or read. I'll just stop there and let you riff on that for a bit.
Totally. That resonates so deeply because that's the spirit and the zeitgeist that we are responding to. It's, there was a fact crisis that turned into a trust crisis. And now I would definitely say it's an epistemological crisis where we sort of, it's not just the matter of we kind of lost the facts. Well, definitely we've done that 10 years ago. But we lost any sort of reference point to what the facts even could be. And I like to say when folks kind of ask me about the breadth of people that we serve, right, with informed.now is importantly kind of the entire spectrum, the entire ideological spectrum of America. And I like to kind of point that people can't even agree on what they disagree on these days, right? And there's a real schism in like the fact basis. And I think to a great degree, this is across all kinds of media, but it's most consequential in information and news media, which is why we're building in that space, because we think it's the most consequential environment where we need to align on the facts so that we can constructively engage, constructively connect, and constructively disagree as well. And so I do find it very kind of funny, but not funny. But the story of sort of, hearing the same story reported in different ways is such a daily American experience. Like this is such a classic modern American story. And I think it's not just the two of us who are feeling it. I think when you go into the real world and go into the streets, into the bars, into just where people spend their time, everyone is feeling this, right? And I think as a result of this, people have also been not able to interact with each other much across, especially the ideological lines. So like you can't bring up politics in it anymore in a casual conversation. You can't really talk about policy in a bar because there's so much like polarized sensitivity around these things because we all live in these different echo chambers. And I think it's extremely consequential. This is, we're going through a inflection point in American history. This is ultimately, like you kind of like, landed this for me. This is ultimately why we're building Informed, is to bring people back to the same fact base and to the same sort of dinner table so that we're able to constructively engage with each other.
Cool. Well, I support that mission. Really, I think we have to have a common understanding of reality, even if we think it means different things or has different implications. If we don't even agree on the facts, there's very little common ground for us to dialogue, to begin to dialogue. What is a win that you are especially proud of for informed.now over the past year or so?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned this because it actually just happened this morning, and we were featured on the cover of USA Today, and for us, that's a real mainstream publication, right? That has 150 million unique monthly readers, which is practically half of the United States, considering that USA Today doesn't operate outside of USA. And for us, what does it mark? It's not just about another PR feature. For us, it's about our story is being understood. And I feel like that has been the biggest challenge of the past year. It's like trying to get people to understand our story, understand what are we trying to do, because it isn't another agency. It isn't another marketplace platform. It isn't another SaaS product. It's not something that has a precedent in many ways. No one has ever combined the research methodology of open source intelligence called OSINT, which is the methodology used by the CIA, which is what we do, with AI that is purpose built to just this one specific use case, not jack of all trades, right? With a channel, right, that is so familiar and so unfamiliar, which is the SMS channel. And done this at the time when there is this crisis that's going on. So I feel like we're in this very interesting moment of combining and stitching together a few things that aren't new, but their combination is completely unprecedented. And so it's been a hard story to tell, right? Convincing people to, hey, it's safe to text a number, right? And hey, this number is trying to do good by you, right? It's trying to do right by you. Combining this research methodology with an AI framework, with also an unapologetic focus on the human. So it's been a hard story to tell, frankly, Josh. I think that's been the biggest challenge. And over the last few months, and definitely crowned by the feature today, we're suddenly getting that story understood by mainstream media and the mainstream person who is reading mainstream media.
Mainstream, I think the cool part or the hard part to sort of wrap your head around is mainstream media was almost forced to tell the story of its disruption because it's happening enough that it is a story. Like it is a story that needs to be told. And so they're like, here are the people who are saying we're doing a bad job and they're the future. Just, we can't avoid it anymore. I'm not saying USA Today is doing a bad job. I enjoy reading their paper when I'm in a hotel that still carries newspapers, but it's a bit of like, well, we can't avoid this anymore.
So I think the story that we used to tell was rather hostile around the news media being kind of the bad guys, and the legacy media is wrong and make way for the new generation of news. I think that was very much a first draft of the story. And I'm very glad we updated because it wasn't faithful to the reality that I think we observe. I don't know if this framework of like bad guys, good guys is balanced or correct or proper. And I think the story that we are observing a lot more is from a systems perspective. The way the news media industry has evolved through the invisible hand of incentives that guided it has created an environment where no one in particular is desiring this, right? No one particularly wants clickbait news. Nobody wants to be solicited every step of the way. But the way the system has been sort of guided by the invisible hand through advertiser incentives, sponsor incentives, and the way sort of the cards fell to create the house of cards is not prioritizing the reader as it stands today. And so I think of it much more of a systematic issue that is much more anonymous and a bigger structure that I think is sort of at fault. And frankly, you might be a news company and say, hey, why would we talk about an alternative to news? But news companies are also made up of people. And when we talk to other journalists, other reporters, and other folks in media, they've been sort of waiting for a solution like this like it's the second coming, because they also happen to be humans and they also happen to be reading news
Yeah.
when they're off shift, when they're not doing their work. And everyone is feeling this misinformation overload that's
Yeah.
been plaguing the country, and it's still around. It's still we're just getting started in terms of trying to create an alternative to it. So I do very much think that it's the corporations might not immediately jump on this, but the humans behind the corporations have been very eager to partner, to help, and to spread the gospel of facts.
Yeah, that's a good signal for you. Cool. So obviously lots of things have been going right for informed.now, but I'm sure some things have gone wrong. And if it's the startup on the rowboat in the middle of the ocean, you get some waves that threaten to capsize your boat on a pretty regular basis. One thing we say is wisdom is failure redeemed. So I wonder what kind of mistakes or failures that you have experienced that have enabled you to learn or earn some wisdom that you could share with us.
Totally. I would say there's two things that come to mind. One is very common, and I think would resonate with a lot of other founders, and one is very specific to us. So the common one is the hiring side. I think the hiring decisions are so important these days. In the early days of a startup, at any point really, but they have an especially compounding effect when you are in the early stages of building. And I can't say we've made mistakes. I think we've been very lucky with our hiring, and we've been very aggressive and very fast. If anything, I wish we fired faster. I wish we made decisions faster. Right? There's an example that comes to mind just from last month. We kept a person on for just way too long, and it had emotional, cognitive bandwidth costs for us that we can never get back. Right. And so it always feels wrong. It's like, oh, do I really want to fire this person? Do I want to let them go? You start thinking but you start thinking of the optimistic story. At least I do. Start thinking of their comeback story. You start thinking of how great it's going to be once they recover from, an underperformance moment or a moment of not doing their best. And I just think that has place when you're an enterprise. That does not have place when you are in the early stages of building. If you're in a growth stage, in a hyper growth stage, every second matters. The cultural decisions of hiring really, really matter. And I think firing faster is a type of wisdom that we are still sort of growing into. But I don't know if there is time for performance improvement plans
Hmm.
at the earliest stages of growth, right? You either find your person and right away it's going to be very clear. If not, right away, part ways in the most respectful way you can, right? The most empowering way that you can, and just move on, because that hiring pace and getting the right people, it means everything. And so that's one wisdom that we're earning and still continuing to earn.
Let me pause you before you get to your second one. One of the things I say a lot as a coach is this is normal. I know you know this, but this is normal to the point that my co-founder, who runs a PE firm and has scaled companies, sold them to Apple and Facebook and hundreds of employees, he and I were just talking last week, and he relearned the same exact lesson. And I said, I think there are two things I have to keep reminding myself of. One is if they're not in the right job, it's not good for them. And the kindest thing I can do for them is to help them get to the right job. And sometimes all I can do is say, this ain't it. You got to
Yeah.
find something else.
Yeah.
And the second thing is if they're not in the right job, that's not fair to the rest of the team. And so I can't risk their jobs by keeping somebody in the wrong job.
Totally. I love that sort of mutual responsibility framework around, like, it's not a simple, binary decision of I like them, I don't like them in terms of their performance. It's their relationship to the team. Like they matters. Their relationship to their own career. It matters. I love that. There's so many layers of responsibility to hiring. You want to be as honest as possible with yourself and with them, and as quickly as possible. And sometimes it's really hard. because I think it comes down to conviction, and conviction is really hard, right? Feeling convicted in a startup environment is everything. And this demands a sort of a micro conviction of like, I know this is the right person. They're just not, maybe we haven't invested them correctly, or like, hey, this is not going to work no matter what. Like, let's part ways before it becomes more costly for everyone, the team, them, and the company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you had a second one you were going to share.
This one was very specific to us, but our anti-advertisement stance has made it very difficult for us to advertise ourselves, because it would be weird if a company that sort of says we hate advertisement and news, if it would be weird if you discover that company through an advertisement.
Yeah.
And so that's been really hard for us, actually, because we realize, okay, well, we want to have this stance, and it's an ethical stance, it's a philosophical stance, it's the ethos of why we exist. But wait a second, and how are people going to find out about us exactly? And so it's led to some evolution in our thinking around, what does advertisement mean to us? Like we still don't do paid advertisements to this day, but we have leaned into more organic ways of telling the story. A lot of it through creators, through people who are genuine users of our platform, which is really important to us, who feel like they want to champion and sort of be a public referral for the work that we do. And so we try to enable that and empower that as much as possible. And it is a kind of advertisement, but it feels a bit more right than the classic sort of seeing an ad on a Google page, Google ads, meta ads. There, we were still not there. We're still not there to do something like that. It's just too contrary to what we stand for.
Great. I love the shift to figuring out how to do organic stuff and how to foster that organic ecosystem.
Yeah, it's been a tricky part. I can't say we have figured that out yet. We have not.
Yeah, that's normal. Okay, next question. What are some of the best professional investments that you've made in the past year or so?
When you say professional investments, you mean investing in other companies or like investing in a relationship, in a partnership?
More investments in yourself
Okay.
or in investing in the growth of the people in your company.
I see. I think the personal brand is the most overdue investment for every single person, right? I think it's I woke up at the beginning of 2025 and I had nothing. I had no personal brand. I had no footprint online. I was just another one of what I call like the lurker profile, right? Like the profile on LinkedIn that maybe doesn't have a profile picture, and they're just there to consume, but not to engage. And I think that's, there's nothing wrong with consuming if that's what you want to do. But I think if you're serious about building and you're serious about going on a mission to effect change in society, right, in the market, you don't have an option to be a lurker anymore. And you have to make substantial investments that once you start making them, you'll realize how overdue they are. You have to make those investments in your personal brand. And I think if I was to meet a young entrepreneur knowing nothing about them, knowing sort of a new entrepreneur, nothing about them, I would just say, hey, I don't know what you're building, but start building the personal brand like immediately, like yesterday. And so I think it's a kind of investment because for me it has meant a lot of bandwidth, a lot of brain width, as I like to call it, because it's a mix of, I guess, brain power and bandwidth. It's a lot of energy. It's cognitive. It's emotional. It's social to build it up, and it's also financial in many ways. Sometimes you get tools and you use tools that have costs, right? And so it's also time and the patience and all those things combined. It's a very substantial investment, but the return on this investment is practically guaranteed, and it is very, very worthwhile. So I think the biggest investment I've made over the last year is building a personal brand. And it's also something that I've encouraged on my team substantially, saying, hey, if there is downtime in our work, which also there never is, so that's a fiction, build a personal brand, right? Like build that LinkedIn, build your presence, build your personal website, put the footprint down on the internet, and you won't regret it.
Cool. Thank you. What's one of the biggest challenges you're trying to solve right now?
Where do I start? I think we are still solving the challenge of telling our story. We are not done. We've had milestones there, but we are not done telling the story. I think we are, a challenge is it's ambiguous, but we are looking to expand from the urban America more into the rural America. And it requires a different mindset, in a different go to market, in a different approach altogether, I believe. And it's sort of just a whole black box of decisions that we are just starting to crack open. And we're definitely not even close to figuring it out. But our mission from the very beginning has been to be the news concierge for the everyday American. And the everyday American isn't just in urban California or urban East Coast. That's where the vast majority of our users are these days. How do we properly, respectfully, honorably, and strategically present ourselves to a person who has a lot narrower solution set when it comes to technology and it comes to like different solutions, but also has a much perhaps lower level of adoptive, or what's the word, like a lower willingness to adopt, a lower willingness to try things because they are not in the Silicon Valley echo chamber or in the New York echo chamber. And so that's been a really big black box that we're just starting to figure out how to approach.
Interesting. Two more questions. One is, other than building your personal brand, what kind of advice would you give to seed stage founders?
Help other people build their personal brand. It will come back to help you. That's a bit of a cheeky answer, but I do think that don't obsess with venture capital. I think we live in Silicon Valley, in California, in tech. We live in this echo chamber that, again, was designed by people who benefit from it, by the venture capital industry that is an old industry by now and a very mature industry. There is a narrative that you must raise venture capital in order to be legitimate, in order to be validated, in order to be accepted, in order to be respected. I think it's true for some. Venture capital is just a tool when you need it. It's just a tool when you need upfront substantial investments into growth. It is not the default option, right? It's usually presented as a default option in the circles that we sort of run in. And it just really, it doesn't have to be. I wouldn't let it be. I wouldn't let it be the default option. I would say to a lot of seed stage founders, stop obsessing over raising money. Stop obsessing over getting that third party validation from some VC. Just put the phone down, right? And find ways to be as scrappy as possible, as bootstrapped as possible. And for most ideas, you don't actually need venture funding. I think that's part of the biggest mystery or myths that's been constructed is in order to be in startup world, you need to have venture capital. You absolutely don't need venture capital to be in the startup world. There's a small minority of companies that absolutely require it. For most people, you're just not being disciplined enough, rigorous enough, lean enough, right? Reread the startup Bible. I do think that letting go of that obsession with fundraising and finding scrappier ways, to operate, that's the playbook.
Yeah, it sounds like I just talked with another founder about boot scaling and seed strapping.
I like that.
Sort of two different approaches. You bootstrap until you get product market fit, and then you raise so you can scale faster. The other way is you raise a pre-seed or maybe a seed, and then you never raise again. So
I like that. I think the less raises, the better. I mean, I've always been very fascinated back in my venture days, but also now, I've always been very fascinated by companies that just keep raising these huge rounds after they're profitable, right? It's you can obviously raise forever if you need it, right? But there's a profile of a company that actually has profitability and just keeps raising anyway. And sometimes I look at those markets and I'm like, you're not Uber. Like, you don't need to be doing this. Like, you don't need to land grab so aggressively. I've always been really fascinated. And I think it is part of that sort of myth that's sold to us that you need to raise all the time. You don't need to raise all the time. You don't need to be on the, what do they call this, the treadmill, the venture treadmill. You don't need to be on that. In fact, if you can afford not to step foot on it, better, better. If you can step on foot in just once, as you mentioned, the seed stage, great. Get off the treadmill as soon as possible and focus on actually building. Because I think this shouldn't come as a surprise, but fundraising and courting investors and just engaging in that realm is antithetical or is a direct opportunity cost against actually building the company. And I'm a big advocate for building the company and allocating your time and energy to that instead of chasing investors.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So if somebody out there is listening and they're like, I like Informed, this sounds cool. I think there's sort of two questions. How can they sign up to start getting your service? And then the other question is, how can they help? If people want to help deal with this crisis of epistemology, this crisis of knowledge and fact in the world, how can they support your mission?
Yeah, I mean, the two answers are definitely combined because we're looking for our people. We're looking for fellow news minimalists who want to have the peace of mind, right? And be informed at the same time. What a crazy ask. And so we are easy to find. Our brand name is informed.now, and that is also our website. So you can head right over to it to learn more about what we do and the minimalism that we pioneer, and obviously sign up and be part of the mission. And I always think this is, part answer to your question, part advice, but if someone wants to help, just sign up, right? And give feedback, right? And like, I think that's the gateway to helping is as you sign up and this is resonating with you, literally like for us, you can literally text us, right? They can't do that with a lot of companies, but for us, you can literally text us, say, hey, here's some feedback. Here's some thoughts I have. That opens the door for so many other ways that, we could engage, we could partner, we could help each other. And so I want to leave that door open to anyone who's resonating with some of the things I've shared tonight.
Thanks, Kira. So glad to have you on the podcast. I love I love that we talked philosophy and business and wove it all together into one story. So I really appreciate you taking the time and wish you well.
Thank you, Josh. This has been delightful. Thank you very much for having me.